They thought they had won. The Harrington family had everything: old money, a sprawling estate, and the arrogance to match. When they sent that invitation to James's ex-wife Sarah, it wasn't an olive branch, it was a weapon. They wanted her to watch from the back row while James married a younger, wealthier heiress. They wanted her to feel small. They wanted her to regret leaving. But they made one critical mistake. They didn't check who was on the guest list of fate. Sarah didn't just show up. She arrived in a blood-red dress leading 3 identical toddlers by the hand. And by the time the cake was cut, the Harrington legacy was in ashes. This is the story of how one woman turned a humiliation ritual into a massacre of secrets. The envelope felt heavy, expensive. It was cream-colored cardstock, textured like linen, with the initials J&C embossed in legitimate silver leaf. Sarah pulled it from her mailbox in her modest apartment in Seattle, her fingers trembling just slightly. She didn't need to open it to know what it was, but she did anyway. Mr. and Mrs. Robert Harrington request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their son James Arthur Harrington to Courtney Ann Waldorf. It was a wedding invitation, but for Sarah it was a summons to a humiliation. 3 years ago, Sarah had fled the Harrington estate in the middle of the night with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. She had been the mistake, the daughter of a high school teacher whom James had married in a fit of rebellion. For 2 years, James's mother, Evelyn Harrington, had made Sarah's life a quiet, suffocating hell. Evelyn was a woman who smiled with her teeth, but never her eyes. She would rearrange the furniture in Sarah's bedroom while she was out, forget to invite her to family dinners, and constantly whisper loudly about how James needed an heir and how Sarah was barren stock. When the divorce was finalized, Evelyn had whispered one last thing to Sarah in the courtroom hallway. "You were never really one of us, dear. You were just a placeholder until James grew up." Now this, an invitation to the wedding of the century at the Blackwood Manor in Charleston. Why invite the ex-wife? There was only one reason. Evelyn wanted an audience. She wanted Sarah to see Courtney Waldorf, a senator's daughter, blonde, statuesque, and dripping in generational wealth, take the spot Sarah had failed to keep. Sarah tossed the invitation onto her kitchen counter. "I'm not going," she muttered, turning to the stove where a pot of mac and cheese was boiling. "Not going where Mama." Sarah turned. Standing in the doorway of the kitchen were 3 pairs of wide hazel eyes, Liam, Noah, and Oliver, her triplets. They were 2.5 years old, a whirlwind of energy and chaos, with unruly dark curls that mirrored their father's perfectly. Sarah felt a pang in her chest. James didn't know. When she had left that night 3 years ago, she hadn't known either. It was only weeks later, alone and struggling to find a job in a new city, that the doctor had given her the news. 3 heartbeats, Ms. Miller. She had almost called James. She had dialed the number 12 times. But then she remembered Evelyn's voice. "I will destroy you, Sarah. If you ever try to take a penny from my son, I will bury you in legal fees until you starve." Sarah knew that if the Harringtons found out about the babies, they wouldn't help her raise them. They would take them. They had the best lawyers in the state. Sarah was a waitress working double shifts. They would paint her as unfit, unstable, and poor. She would lose her boys. So she stayed silent. She raised them alone. She worked her way up from waitressing to managing a boutique hotel. She was tired, but she was free. She looked back at the invitation. A handwritten note was tucked inside the RSVP card. It was in Evelyn's distinct, sharp script. "Do come, Sarah," James insists. "We want you to see how happy he finally is." It would be good for you to have closure. Evelyn. It was the audacity that sparked the fire. Closure. They thought she was still pining for him. They thought she was broken. Sarah looked at her boys. Liam was trying to feed a toy dinosaur to Noah. Oliver was quietly stacking blocks with a focus that was terrifyingly similar to his grandfather, Robert Harrington. They deserved to know their father. And their father deserved to know what he had lost. But more than that, Evelyn Harrington needed to learn that you cannot summon a storm and expect it to rain only on your enemies. Sarah picked up her phone and dialed her best friend, a ruthless divorce attorney named Brenda. "Brenda," Sarah said, her voice steady for the first time in years. "I need a dress, a red one, and I need 3 miniature tuxedos." "Why?" Brenda asked, hearing the edge in Sarah's voice. "Because the Harringtons invited me to a wedding," Sarah said, watching Oliver knock down his tower of blocks with a triumphant grin. "And I think it's time they met the rest of the family." The wedding was predictably obnoxious. Blackwood Manor was a sprawling estate that looked more like a museum than a home. The lawn was manicured to within an inch of its life. White peacocks roamed the gardens. A string quartet played Debussy near a fountain filled with imported champagne. The guests were the glitterati of the East Coast politicians, tech moguls and socialites who had never touched a door handle in their lives. James stood at the altar, looking dashing in a bespoke Armani tuxedo. He looked older than Sarah remembered his face, a little more gaunt, his eyes scanning the crowd with a nervous energy. Next to him stood his best man, his brother Philip, who looked bored. In the front row, Evelyn Harrington sat like a queen on a throne. She wore a silver gown that cost more than Sarah's annual salary. She was smiling, holding court, accepting compliments on the lavishness of the event. She checked her watch. She was waiting for the moment. She had instructed the ushers to seat Sarah in the back, but on the aisle. She wanted to ensure Sarah had a clear view of James kissing the bride. The ceremony was about to begin. The guests hushed as the music swelled. But the bride wasn't walking down the aisle yet. A sleek black SUV with tinted windows rolled up the long gravel driveway, ignoring the valet stand and pulling right up to the start of the aisle runner. The gravel crunched loudly, breaking the silence of the string quartet. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Who is that?" "Is that part of the show?" The driver's door opened, and a uniformed chauffeur stepped out. He walked around to the back passenger door and opened it. First, a leg emerged, a stiletto heel sharp enough to kill a man. Then the dress. It was a deep blood-red silk that hugged every curve, flowing like liquid rubies. It was inappropriate. It was loud. It was magnificent. Sarah stepped out. She had cut her hair into a sharp bob that framed her face, and her makeup was flawless. She didn't look like the timid, mousy teacher James had divorced. She looked like a movie star. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Evelyn's head snapped around. Her smile faltered. But Sarah didn't walk down the aisle immediately. She turned back to the car. She leaned in and extended a hand. "Come on, boys," she said, her voice carrying in the stunned silence. "Hold hands." Out of the car hopped 3 toddlers. They were dressed in identical miniature black tuxedos with little red bow ties that matched their mother's dress. The silence at Blackwood Manor was absolute. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. The boys were carbon copies of James. They had the Harrington nose, the dark curls, the distinct hazel eyes. There was no denying it. You could have taken a baby photo of James and placed it next to any of them, and it would be a match. Sarah took a deep breath. She held Liam's hand, who held Noah's, who held Oliver's. "Chin up," she whispered to them. She began to walk, not to the back row where she was assigned. She walked straight down the center aisle. The guests parted their necks, craning. The whispers turned into a roar. "Are those... They look just like him. Oh my God. Look at Evelyn's face." James, standing at the altar, went pale. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked from Sarah to the three boys, and his knees visibly buckled. Philip had to grab his arm to keep him upright. Evelyn stood up. She forgot her dignity. She forgot the senator sitting 3 rows back. She pointed a shaking finger at Sarah. "What is the meaning of this?" Evelyn shrieked. Her voice cracked, ruining the serene atmosphere she had paid $500,000 to curate. Sarah stopped 10 feet from the altar. She looked stunning, vibrant, and dangerous against the backdrop of white flowers and pale pastels. She looked directly at Evelyn, ignoring James completely. "You invited me, Evelyn," Sarah said, her voice calm and clear. The invitation said, "The Harrington family." I didn't want to be rude and leave the grandsons behind. Grandsons. The word floated in the air like toxic smoke. Courtney the bride had just appeared at the top of the aisle with her father. She froze. She saw the red dress. She saw the children. She saw her groom looking at another woman with a mixture of horror and longing that he had never directed at her. "James," Courtney cried out, her voice shrill. "Who are they?" James stumbled forward, leaving the altar. He walked toward Sarah as if in a trance. He fell to his knees in the grass right in front of the 3 boys. "Sarah," he whispered, tears instantly filling his eyes. He reached out a trembling hand toward Oliver. Are they mine?" "They're yours, James," Sarah said, her voice devoid of pity. "Meet Liam, Noah, and Oliver. They turned 2 last month. You missed the party." Evelyn was rushing over now, her face purple with rage. "Liar! She's a liar!" Evelyn screamed, grabbing James by the shoulder to pull him back. "She's a gold digger. She probably adopted them. Get security. Get them out of here." "Don't touch him," Sarah snapped. Her voice was like a whip crack. Liam, scared by the screaming woman in the silver dress, started to cry. That set off Noah. James shook his mother's hand off. He looked at the boys, seeing his own face reflected in theirs. He looked at the shape of their eyes, the Harrington eyes. "Mother, stop it," James said, his voice low. "They are frauds," Evelyn hissed. "She is trying to ruin your day. Security." 2 burly men in suits started moving toward Sarah. Sarah didn't flinch. She reached into her clutch purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She held it up. "DNA test results," Sarah announced, turning to the crowd. "Certified, 99.9% match to James Arthur Harrington, and a copy of the birth certificates." She tossed the papers onto the grass at Evelyn's feet. "I didn't come here to stop the wedding," Sarah said, smoothing her dress. "I came because you wanted to show me what I was missing. I thought it was only fair I show you what you were missing." She looked at James, who was weeping openly now, holding Noah's small hand. "Congratulations on your wedding, James," Sarah said coldly. "Come on, boys, say goodbye to your father." "No," James shouted, grabbing the hem of her dress. "No, you can't leave Sarah, please." At the top of the aisle, Courtney threw her bouquet onto the ground and stormed off, sobbing. The Senator Courtney's father stood up, his face red with fury, and began marching toward the Harringtons. The wedding was over. The war had just begun. The silence of the garden was replaced by a cacophony of chaos. The guests were fleeing like rats from a sinking ship, clutching their designer purses and whispering furiously into their phones. The wedding of the century was now the scandal of the decade. Sarah stood her ground as the staff frantically tried to usher the remaining gawkers away. James was still on his knees in the grass, staring at the three boys as if they were hallucinations. "Get them inside." Robert Harrington, James's father, finally spoke. He was a man who rarely raised his voice, preferring to let his wife Evelyn do the dirty work. But his face was ashen. He looked at the triplets not with love, but with a terrifying calculation. Now, before the press helicopters arrive. Sarah didn't move. "I'm not going anywhere with you people. My call is waiting." "You will come inside," Evelyn hissed, stepping over the train of the abandoned bridal gown that Courtney had left behind. "You have created a scene, Sarah. You will not leave until we fix this." "Fix it?" Sarah laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "You can't fix this, Evelyn. Courtney is gone. The senator is furious, and your son has finally seen the truth." "Sarah, please," James pleaded, standing up on shaky legs. He looked broken. The arrogance was gone. I need to talk to them. I need to know." Sarah looked at Liam, who was clinging to her leg thumb in his mouth. She saw the desperation in James's eyes. She knew that if she left now, Evelyn would spin a narrative that Sarah was hysterical, that the kids were rented actors, that it was all a lie. She needed to nail the coffin shut. "Fine," Sarah said. 10 minutes, in the library, but if anyone raises their voice at my children, I'm calling the police." The procession into the manor was grim. Senator Waldorf Courtney's father had refused to leave. He marched into the library with them, his face a mottled red. "You have humiliated my daughter." The senator spat at Robert Harrington as soon as the heavy oak doors closed. "I have donors sitting out there. I have press. Do you know what this does to my re-election campaign?" "We will handle it, Charles," Evelyn said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. She poured herself a stiff drink from the crystal decanter. "It's a misunderstanding. The girl is clearly unstable." "Unstable." Sarah stepped forward, settling the boys on a leather sofa with an iPad to distract them. She turned to face the room. "I have a master's degree in economics, Evelyn. I own my own business. And I raised 3 children without a cent of your money. I'm the most stable person in this room." James walked over to the sofa. He didn't dare touch the boys, but he knelt down watching them. Oliver looked up from the iPad and frowned, scrunching his nose. "He does that," James whispered, his voice cracking. "I do that when I'm concentrating." "I know," Sarah said softly. "Why?" James looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. "Why didn't you tell me 3 years, Sarah? I missed their first steps. I missed their first words." "Ask your mother," Sarah said, pointing a finger at Evelyn. James stood up and turned to Evelyn. "Mother." Evelyn slammed her glass down. "I did what was necessary. She was a gold digger." "James, she would have trapped you. We had to get her out so you could marry someone suitable. Someone like Courtney." "And look how that turned out," Senator Waldorf sneered. "My daughter is gone. And I am pulling my funding from your development projects, Harrington. Consider our partnership dead." The room went cold. The Waldorf money was essential for the Harringtons' new real estate venture. Without it, they were leveraged to the hilt. "Charles, be reasonable," Robert Harrington stammered. "But there is something else, isn't there?" Sarah interrupted. She walked over to the large portrait of James's grandfather hanging above the fireplace. The reason you were so desperate for James to marry Courtney wasn't just social climbing. It was the trust. Evelyn went pale. "Shut your mouth." Sarah turned to James. "James, did you ever read your grandfather's will, the full version, not the summary your mother gave you?" James looked confused. "No." "Why?" "The Harrington Family Trust," Sarah recited from memory, "stipulates that the bulk of the estate, including the control of the company, shares, does not pass to the heir until he produces a legitimate male successor. Until then, the estate is managed by the surviving guardians." Sarah smiled dangerously. "Your parents have been spending your money, James. They've been living off the trust because you didn't have a son. As long as you were childless, Evelyn and Robert controlled the purse strings. They pushed you to marry Courtney because they needed her family's money to float them until you had a kid. But they needed control of that kid." James looked at his parents. The guilt was written all over their faces. "Is that true?" James asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You didn't want me to be happy. You wanted a stud horse to secure your bank accounts." "We did it for the family," Evelyn shrieked, "to protect the legacy." "And here is the kicker," Sarah said, gesturing to the 3 boys on the couch. "You have 3 male heirs, born in wedlock, conceived before the divorce was finalized. Legally, James, the trust is yours. The allowance your mother gives you. It's a joke. You own this house. You own the company. And they," she pointed to the triplets, "are the keys to the kingdom." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Senator Waldorf started laughing. It was a cruel, barking laugh. "My God, you didn't just lose a daughter-in-law, Evelyn. You lost your checkbook." Evelyn looked at the triplets with a mixture of hatred and terror. She realized her mistake. By driving Sarah away, she had hidden the very thing that would have secured the family fortune. But now that fortune belonged to James, and the mother of the heirs was the woman Evelyn had tormented. "Get out," James said. "James, darling, listen." Evelyn started. "Get out," James roared, grabbing a vase and hurling it against the wall. It shattered, startling the boys. "Get out of my sight, both of you." Robert and Evelyn retreated, pale and shaking. The senator followed them, dialing his lawyer on his cell phone to begin the lawsuits. James stood in the middle of the library, breathing hard. He turned to Sarah. The anger drained out of him, replaced by a profound sorrow. "You knew all this?" he asked. "I found out after I left," Sarah said. "My lawyer is very good." "So what now?" James asked, looking at his sons. "Now," Sarah said, picking up her purse. "I take my children home. You have a mess to clean up, James. If you want to be a father, you call my lawyer. But don't you dare come to my house until you've cut the cord with that witch." She gathered the boys. "Come on, loves. Show's over." James watched them leave. He didn't stop her. He knew he didn't deserve to. Not yet. 3 days later, Sarah was in the playroom of her small townhouse folding laundry while the boys watched cartoons. The adrenaline of the wedding had faded, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. She knew Auntie Evelyn Harrington. She knew the woman was like a viper. She didn't strike once and give up. She struck until the poison took hold. The doorbell rang. Sarah checked the peephole. It wasn't James. It was a man in a cheap suit holding a manila envelope. A process server. Sarah opened the door. "Sarah Miller." "Yes." "You've been served." He handed her the thick envelope and walked away. Sarah tore it open right there in the hallway. Emergency custody order. Her heart stopped. She scanned the legal jargon. Plaintiff James Arthur Harrington. Co-plaintiffs Robert and Evelyn Harrington. They were suing for full custody, not joint custody, full custody. The document claimed that Sarah had absconded with the children that she was living in substandard conditions, and most horrifyingly that she was mentally unstable and had kept the children from their father out of spite and malice, thereby endangering their emotional development. There was even a sworn affidavit from a doctor Sarah had never met, claiming she had a history of paranoia. "They move fast," a voice said from the sidewalk. Sarah looked up. Standing by the curb was Brenda, her lawyer and best friend. Brenda looked furious. "I got a copy faxed to my office 10 minutes ago," Brenda said, marching up the steps. "Let me see it." Sarah handed over the papers, her hands shaking. "How can they do this?" James saw them. He seemed happy. "James didn't write this," Brenda said, flipping through the pages. "Look at the signature on the filing. It's his family's law firm. They likely have power of attorney or bullied him into signing. Or," Brenda paused, "or James is weaker than we thought." "He told them to get out," Sarah said, clutching the door frame. "He threw them out of the library. And then he probably spent 3 days being gaslit by his mother," Brenda said grimly. "Sarah, they have infinite money. They are going to try to bleed us dry. They don't want the boys because they love them. They want the boys because those boys are the key to the trust. Without custody, Evelyn loses her mansion." "I won't let them take my babies," Sarah whispered. The fear was turning into cold, hard steel in her gut. "We need to fight fire with napalm," Brenda said. "I'm going to file a countersuit, but we need James. If James sides with his mother, it's going to be a long, ugly war. If we can flip James, Evelyn has nothing." "How do we flip him?" Sarah asked. "He's been under her thumb his whole life." "We show him the one thing Evelyn can't lie about," Brenda said. "The past." Later that night, the phone rang. It was a blocked number. Sarah picked it up. "Hello?" "Sarah, it was James. He sounded drunk, or exhausted, or both." "James," Sarah said, signaling to Brenda, who was sitting at the kitchen table with a notepad. Brenda motioned for her to put it on speaker. "I didn't sign it," James slurred. "The papers. I didn't read them. Mother said it was just to establish paternity formally. She said it was standard procedure. It's an emergency custody order, James," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "She's trying to take the boys away from me. She's claiming I'm crazy." There was a silence on the line, then a crash, as if James had knocked something over. "She lied to me," James whispered. "Again." "James, you need to listen to me," Sarah said urgently. "You are 30 years old. You are the father of 3 children. You have to choose. Right now. Are you Robert and Evelyn's puppet, or are you a father?" "I don't know what to do," James sobbed. "They locked the gates. They have security everywhere. They told me you were planning to flee the country with the boys. They said you bought tickets to Paris." "I work at a hotel, James. I can barely afford tickets to the zoo," Sarah shouted. "They are isolating you, just like they isolated me." "I want to see them," James said. "I want to see my sons." "Then come get us," Sarah said. "But not at the house. They'll be watching the house. Meet me at the place where we actually got married, not the church. The real place." There was a pause. James's breathing hitched. The diner, Sarah confirmed. "Midnight. Come alone. If I see one lawyer, one security guard, or your mother, you will never see us again. I will disappear, James. And this time, you won't find me." She hung up. Brenda looked at her. The diner. That's risky. It's the only place Evelyn doesn't know about, Sarah said. We eloped there before the big ceremony. It was the only time James was ever truly himself. If that James still exists, he'll be there. And if he's not? Brenda asked. Sarah walked over to the drawer where she kept a small velvet box. Inside was a cheap plastic ring James had won for her at a carnival 10 years ago. Then I destroy the Harrington family, Sarah said. I have one card left to play, and it will burn Blackwood Manor to the ground. At midnight, the roadside diner on the edge of town was bathed in the buzzing neon glow of a flickering "open" sign. It was pouring rain, a classic dramatic storm. Sarah sat in a booth at the back, facing the door. Brenda was in the car outside, watching the perimeter. The boys were with Sarah's mother for the night. This was dangerous ground. At 12:15 a.m., the door chimed. James walked in. He was soaked. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo or a suit. He was wearing jeans and a hooded sweatshirt, looking like the college boy Sarah had fallen in love with. He looked around frantically until he saw her. He rushed over and slid into the booth. He looked terrible. Eyes bloodshot stubble on his chin. You came, Sarah said, not smiling. I climbed out the window, James said, wiping rain from his face. Philip was guarding my door. My own brother. They think I'm having a breakdown. Are you? Maybe, James laughed bitterly. I found out I have 3 kids and my entire life is a lie. Who wouldn't break? He reached across the table, trying to take her hand. Sarah pulled back. Not yet, she said. She pulled a folder from her bag. Brenda pulled some strings. These are the financial records for the Harrington Trust for the last 3 years. She slid the papers to him. Look at the dates, James. James squinted at the spreadsheet. I don't understand. The date I left, Sarah pointed. 3 years ago. 2 days after I left, a withdrawal was made from the trust. $2 million, labeled consulting fees. Okay, the consulting firm is owned by a man named Dr. Aris Thorne, Sarah said. Does the name ring a bell? James frowned. Thorne, he was the doctor, the fertility specialist Mother sent us to. Exactly, Sarah said. The doctor who told me I was barren. The doctor who told you that my eggs were non-viable and that we would never conceive naturally. James froze. The color drained from his face. She paid him, Sarah whispered. $2 million, James. She paid him to lie to us. There was never anything wrong with me. She wanted you to think I was broken, so you would agree to the divorce. She knew that if we had a child, she would lose control of the money. So she made sure we thought we couldn't. James stared at the paper. The numbers blurred. The betrayal was so absolute, so monstrous, it was hard to comprehend. His mother hadn't just been mean. She had medically gaslit them. She had stolen years of his life. She had almost stolen his children. She sterilized our marriage, James whispered. The horror in his voice was real. She tried to, Sarah corrected. But nature found a way. We conceived the triplets naturally, James. Probably the night we came back from that terrible anniversary dinner. James closed his eyes. His fists clenched on the table until his knuckles turned white. I'm going to kill her, he said simply. No, Sarah said. Death is too easy. We don't want revenge, James. We want justice, and we want the future. She leaned in. You are going to go back there. You are going to pretend you are broken. You are going to sign whatever papers she wants. And then at the custody hearing on Friday, you are going to do exactly what I tell you. James looked at her. For the first time in years, the fog in his eyes cleared. He saw the woman he had loved, the woman who was stronger than he had ever been. "Tell me what to do," James said. "I'm listening." James climbed back through his bedroom window at Blackwood Manor at 3 a.m., soaking wet and shivering, but not from the cold. He was shivering from the sheer voltage of the hatred coursing through his veins. He had spent his entire life believing that his parents, while cold and demanding, ultimately wanted what was best for him. He had believed that Sarah had left because she couldn't handle the pressure of their world, because she was weak. Now he knew the truth. Sarah was iron. His parents were rust, corroding everything they touched. The next morning, James walked into the breakfast room. Evelyn was sitting at the head of the table looking refreshed. She was reading the society pages, humming softly. The disaster of the wedding seemed forgotten, replaced by the thrill of the upcoming legal slaughter. "Where were you last night?" Philip asked, looking up from his espresso. "I checked your room. You weren't there." James sat down. He didn't look at them. He kept his eyes focused on the linen tablecloth. "I went for a drive," James said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I needed to clear my head. I couldn't breathe in this house." Evelyn lowered her newspaper. She studied him like a specimen under a microscope. "And did you come to your senses?" James took a deep breath. This was the hardest performance of his life. He had to channel the weak, pliable boy they had molded him into. "You were right," James whispered. "About everything." Evelyn smiled. It was a terrifying, predatory smile. "Of course I was, darling. Sarah is a toxic influence, hiding those children. It's unforgivable. We are doing the right thing by taking them. We are saving them." "Saving them," James parroted. "The lawyers will be here at 10, Robert said, entering the room. "We need to prep you for your testimony tomorrow. You need to be unwavering, James. You need to paint a picture of Sarah as unstable, vindictive, and unfit. Can you do that?" James finally looked up. He made his eyes glassy desperate. "Just tell me what to say, Father. I just want this over with. I just want my life back." Evelyn reached out and patted his hand. Her touch made his skin crawl. "That's my boy. Don't worry. By Friday afternoon, those children will be in the nursery upstairs, and Sarah Miller will be a bad memory. We've already hired 3 nannies." James felt sick. They didn't want to be grandparents. They wanted to be keepers. They wanted to raise Liam, Noah, and Oliver just like they had raised him and Philip, as investments, not human beings. While James was enduring his parents' coaching, Sarah was in Brenda's office, surrounded by whiteboards filled with timelines and financial data. "We have the bribe," Brenda said, tapping the spreadsheet. "But it's circumstantial. Evelyn could claim it was for something else. We need the nail in the coffin." "Dr. Thorne," Sarah said. "He's gone to ground," Brenda said. "His practice is closed for renovations. He knows what's coming." "Find him," Sarah said. Her voice was hard. "He took $2 million to tell me I was broken. He stole 3 years of my children having a father. I don't care what it costs, Brenda. Find that pathetic little man and drag him to court." Brenda made a phone call to a private investigator she used for the truly dirty cases. That night, the eve of the hearing, the tension in Blackwood Manor was palpable. Evelyn was celebratory, already planning the welcome home party for the Triplets, a party Sarah wouldn't be invited to. James sat in his room staring at the single text message on his burner phone. It was from Sarah. "Thorne is secured. Tomorrow we burn it down." James deleted the message, crushed the phone under his heel, and flushed the pieces down the toilet. He looked at himself in the mirror. He looked like a Harrington, poised, wealthy, untouchable. "Time to play the part," he whispered to his reflection. The family court hearing was closed to the press, much to Senator Waldorf's disappointment. He had wanted a front-row seat to the Harringtons' public flaying. But inside the mahogany-paneled courtroom, the atmosphere was more intense than any gladiatorial arena. Evelyn and Robert sat on one side, flanked by 4 of the most expensive lawyers in the state. They looked serene, confident in their wealth and their purchased justice. On the other side sat Sarah and Brenda. Sarah wore a simple navy suit. She looked calm, immovable. The Harringtons' lead lawyer, Mr. Sterling, began his opening statement. It was a brutal character assassination. He painted Sarah as a mentally instability gold digger who had kidnapped her own children to extort the wealthy family she had married into. He used words like hateful, manipulative, and dangerous. Evelyn watched Sarah, waiting for the outburst, the tears, but Sarah just made notes on a legal pad. Then Sterling called his star witness. "Your Honor, I call James Harrington to the stand." James walked to the witness stand. He looked impeccable in a charcoal suit. He avoided eye contact with Sarah. Evelyn smirked. This was it. The final nail. Sterling approached the stand. "Mr. Harrington, could you describe for the court your relationship with your ex-wife, Sarah Miller?" James took a deep breath. He looked at the judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Judge Patterson. "My relationship with Sarah was built on a lie," James said clearly. Sterling nodded. "Exactly. A lie she perpetuated. Correct. Hiding your children." James paused. He turned his head slowly and looked directly at his mother. Evelyn's smile faltered slightly at the coldness in his eyes. "No," James said. "The lie my mother perpetuated." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Sterling froze. "Excuse me, Mr. Harrington. I don't think I understand." "It's quite simple," James said, his voice gaining strength with every word. He reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document, the spreadsheet Sarah had given him at the diner. 3 years ago, my mother, Evelyn Harrington, paid Dr. Aris Thorne $2 million to falsify medical records. She paid him to tell my wife she was infertile. She paid him to ensure we would divorce so that I would not produce an heir that would trigger the transfer of the family trust to my control. "Objection!" Sterling roared, leaping to his feet. "This is ambush. This is irrelevant. It is entirely relevant to the character of the people seeking custody of my children," James shouted back, standing up in the witness box. Evelyn was on her feet now, her face a mask of contorted rage. "You ungrateful traitor! After everything we did for you, she has brainwashed you." "Sit down, Mrs. Harrington." Judge Patterson banged her gavel. "One more outburst, and I will hold you in contempt." Evelyn sank back into her chair, breathing heavily. Robert looked like he was having a stroke. "James," Sarah's lawyer. Brenda stood up calmly. "Do you believe Sarah Miller is unfit to raise your children?" "Sarah is the only fit parent in this room," James said, his voice shaking with emotion. "She raised 3 boys alone with nothing, because she was terrified of what my parents would do if they found out. And she was right to be terrified. They are monsters who tried to buy my unborn children out of existence to protect their bank account." James turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I withdraw my petition for custody. I support Sarah Miller having full sole custody, and I request a restraining order keeping my parents 500 feet away from my sons." The courtroom erupted. Sterling was frantically whispering to a stunned Evelyn. Brenda wasn't finished. "Your Honor, as rebuttal we call a surprise witness. He was difficult to locate, which is why he was not on the list." The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. A small, balding man in a rumpled suit was escorted in by a burly private investigator. Evelyn gasped audibly. It was Dr. Thorne. Brenda put him on the stand. He was terrified. He had cut a deal for immunity in exchange for testimony. "Dr. Thorne," Brenda said, "did Evelyn Harrington pay you to lie to James and Sarah Harrington about their fertility?" Thorne stared at his feet. "Yes." "And is this your signature on the bank transfer, accepting the $2 million? "Yes." Judge Patterson looked at the Harringtons. Her expression could have frozen hell over. "I have heard enough," the judge said. "This is one of the most disgusting displays of avarice and manipulation I have ever witnessed in family court." She turned her gaze on Evelyn. "Mrs. Harrington, you attempted to play God with your son's life for money. You are morally bankrupt." The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot. "The plaintiff's petition for emergency custody is dismissed with prejudice. Full legal and physical custody of Liam, Noah, and Oliver Miller is awarded to their mother, Sarah Miller. I am granting a permanent restraining order against Robert and Evelyn Harrington regarding the children and Ms. Miller." The judge paused, her eyes narrowing at Robert and Evelyn. "Furthermore, in light of the testimony regarding the Harrington trust fraud, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for a criminal investigation into fraud and financial abuse." Evelyn screamed, a guttural primal scream of a woman watching her empire dissolve into dust. She tried to lunge toward Sarah, but the bailiff restrained her. James stepped down from the stand. He walked past his parents without a glance. He walked straight to Sarah. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. A nod of respect. A nod of apology. The war was over. The Queen was dead. Long live the mother. The gavel bang that ended the custody hearing didn't just signal the end of a legal battle. It triggered a nuclear winter for the Harrington dynasty. In the days following the verdict, the fallout was not a quiet trickle, but a tsunami. The story of the Red Wedding crash and the subsequent courtroom revelation regarding the fraudulent medical records became national news. Evelyn had wanted her son's wedding to be the social event of the season, and in a twisted monkey's paw sort of way, she got her wish. It was the only thing anyone was talking about, but not for the reasons she had hoped. The tabloids ran wild. The Harrington Horror Show read the headline of the Post. Grandmother Dearest, screamed the Daily Mail. The photograph of Sarah standing in her blood-red dress, flanked by the triplets, was plastered across every social media feed in the country. She became an instant icon of resilience, while Evelyn became the face of aristocratic rot. The district attorney, sensing a career-defining case, wasted no time. With Dr. Thorne's testimony on record and the financial trail exposed by Brenda, the state froze the Harrington assets pending a criminal investigation into fraud, embezzlement, and medical malpractice. The fall of Blackwood Manor was swift and absolute. The bank, realizing that the family's liquidity was tied up in criminal proceedings and that the Waldorf investment was dead, called in the massive loans that had been floating the estate. 10 days after the trial, a foreclosure sign was hammered into the manicured lawn where the peacocks used to roam. The eviction was the final humiliation. Robert and Evelyn Harrington didn't leave in a limousine. They left in a sedan watched by a cluster of paparazzi who had camped out at the gates. The staff had already quit. The friends, who had once fought for invitations to Evelyn's garden parties, now treated the Harringtons like they carried a contagious disease. Their phones stopped ringing. The country club revoked their memberships, citing a violation of moral conduct bylaws. They were forced into a 2-bedroom condo on the edge of the city, a grey, soulless box with thin walls and laminate flooring. For a woman who had spent her life measuring her worth by the thread count of her linens and the zip code of her residence, this was a fate worse than prison. Evelyn spent her days pacing the small living room, muttering about conspiracies and ungrateful children, watching her reflection in a cheap mirror, waiting for a trial that would likely end with her behind bars. James, however, did not go down with the ship. For the first time in 30 years, James Arthur Harrington made a choice that was entirely his own. He refused the trust. He refused to fight for the poisoned legacy. When the lawyers asked if he wanted to contest the freezing of the assets to secure his own portion, James simply said, "Let it burn." He walked away from the wreckage with nothing but his clothes and his car. It was terrifying, but for the first time the air he breathed felt clean. The transition wasn't easy. The name Harrington was toxic in the business world now. He was rejected from a dozen interviews, the hiring managers looking at him with a mixture of pity and suspicion. But James persisted. He eventually landed a job in sales at a mid-level tech firm in the city. It wasn't glamorous. He had a cubicle, a quota, and a manager who didn't care who his grandfather was. He rented a small 1-bedroom apartment 10 minutes away from Sarah's townhouse. It had a leaky faucet and a view of a brick wall. But to James it was a palace because he paid for it with money he had earned. He spent his evenings reading books on parenting, trying to bridge the 3-year gap of knowledge he had lost. He learned about potty training regression, about dietary restrictions, about the favorite cartoons of 2-year-olds. He was preparing for the most important interview of his life. 2 weeks after the verdict on a crisp Saturday morning, James stood on Sarah's doorstep. He checked his reflection in the glass of the storm door. He looked tired. He had dark circles under his eyes, and his suit was replaced by a soft sweater and jeans. He held 3 small identical plush teddy bears in his arm, a cliché perhaps, but he didn't know what else to bring. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He had faced boardrooms, hostile takeovers, and his mother's wrath, but nothing terrified him more than what lay behind this door. He knocked. Inside the house was alive with the sounds of chaos, the thumping of small feet, the clatter of toys, the sound of a cartoon playing on the TV. The door opened. Sarah stood there. She looked different than she had in court. She wore yoga pants and an oversized t-shirt, her hair in a messy bun. She looked tired, but happy. She looked real. She saw James, and her expression tightened slightly. The war was over, but the scars were still there. She looked at the bears, then up at his eyes. She saw the fear in them. She saw the humility. "I'm not here to push," James said quickly, his voice raspy. "I know the court gave you everything, and you deserve it. I wanted to drop these off, and maybe if you're okay with it, just see them." For a minute, Sarah leaned against the doorframe. She studied him. She had spent 3 years hating the memory of him, hating the weakness that had let his mother drive her away. But the man standing on her porch wasn't the weak boy she had married. That boy was gone. This was a man trying to build something new from the ashes. She thought about the boys. They had asked about the sad man from the wedding. They were curious. They had a right to know their history, even the jagged parts of it. Sarah stepped back and pulled the door wide open. "Come in, James," she said softly. "But take your shoes off. We just vacuumed." James let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for a month. "Thank you," he whispered. He stepped into the warmth of the hallway. The smell of pancakes and laundry detergent hit him, a scent so domestic and normal it made his chest ache. "Liam, Noah, Oliver," Sarah called out toward the living room. "Pause the show for a second." There was a groan of protest, and then the sound of 3 pairs of feet thundering down the hallway. The triplets skidded to a halt at the end of the rug. They were wearing mismatched superhero pajamas. They looked at the stranger in the hallway with wide hazel eyes that mirrored James's own perfectly. James felt his knees go weak. He slowly lowered himself to the floor, ignoring the stiffness in his back until he was on their eye level. He didn't reach out. He didn't try to grab them. He just sat there, letting them assess him. He held out the bears. "Hi," James said, his voice trembling. "I brought you these. I heard you like bears." Noah, the boldest of the 3, took a step forward. He snatched a bear, inspected it critically, and then hugged it. Liam and Oliver followed suit, cautious but interested. "Are you the man from the grass?" Oliver asked, tilting his head. James swallowed the lump in his throat. Yeah, that was me." "Why were you crying?" Liam asked. James looked up at Sarah. She was watching him, her arms crossed, but her face was soft. She gave him a small nod. "Go on," the nod said. "Tell the truth." James looked back at his sons. "I was crying because I was happy," James said, tears finally spilling over his lashes. "I was happy because I finally found you." "Who are you?" Noah asked, clutching his new bear. James took a deep breath. He didn't look at Sarah for permission this time. He knew who he was. "I'm your dad," he whispered. The words hung in the air, heavy and golden. The boys didn't fully understand the weight of it, not yet. To them, he was just a nice man with presence. But to James, it was a vow. Sarah watched as James sat on the floor, awkwardly answering questions about his sweater and whether he liked dinosaurs. She saw the clumsy, terrifying, beautiful beginning of a relationship. Evelyn Harrington had tried to use humiliation as a weapon. She had tried to prune her family tree to perfection, cutting off the branches she deemed unworthy. But she forgot the most basic rule of nature: when you cut a branch, the roots only grow deeper. The Harringtons lost their manor, their money, and their legacy. They sat in a cold condo, ruling over nothing. But here, in a messy townhouse, filled with noise and cheap toys, Sarah looked at her boys and their father, and she knew she had won the only thing that mattered. She walked into the kitchen to pour coffee for 2. The story wasn't over, not really. It was just beginning. They say the best revenge is living well, but Sarah Miller proved that the best revenge is living truthfully. The Harringtons had everything money could buy, but they were bankrupt in the things that count: loyalty, love, and honor. They tried to crush a mother to protect a bank account, and in the end, they lost both. Evelyn wanted a legacy. She got one. She will be remembered as the woman who had it all and threw it away because she couldn't stand the idea of her son loving a woman she couldn't control. And James. He learned the hard way that you can be born with a silver spoon in your mouth and still starve to death emotionally. It took losing everything to find the 3 little heartbeats that made him a man. If this story of justice, karma, and the unstoppable force of a mother's love hit you right in the feels, destroy that like button. It helps us find more stories like this, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that the truth always comes out in the end. What would you have done if you were Sarah? Would you have let James back in? Or would you have shut the door forever? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. You do not want to miss the next story. Until then, stay safe and watch out for the in-laws.